90, if he is a day. Bedridden these 11 years and not seen by a living soul outside that house since the old king's jubilee. And she is to nurse him? She is to sit by him and be a duchess, said Barnaby Crowell, and in a 12-month she is a widow with a jointure. And then, Mrs. Yvette, we shall see who is asked to dinner in this county. The young man by the parlour door at Odell's Cross had been taken for the attorney's clerk, because he had come in a hired gig with a leather case under his arm and had not corrected anybody, and he stood there in a wet greatcoat with his hat in his hand and heard the whole of it. The girl they were disposing of was on the other side of the room, mending a fire that did not need mending. You will not tell her the money is already paid, said Mrs. Yvette. I shall tell her nothing at all. She has been told what she needs. £4,000, said Charity Odell, without turning round, was paid over to my uncle on the 11th of February, and 340 of it is spent, chiefly on that coat. I keep the books in this house, aunt. I have kept them since I was 15. There is nothing I have not been told. There are only things nobody has said to my face. Jasper, Duke of Havermere, 25 years old, stood in the doorway and watched her put the poker back on its hook. Within the 12-month he would stand at the back of a panelled court and hear that same woman, whom he had bought and never courted, defend her own name in front of 200 people without one word of help from him, and the shame of that morning would keep him honest the rest of his life. You are the attorney's man, she said to him. You have brought the license. I have. Then you may tell whoever sent you that I shall be there, and I shall say the words, and there will be no scene in the church. She looked at him steadily. There was ash on her cuff. And you may tell them one thing more, since you have a face that looks as though it hears things. I am not going to a house to wait for a man to die. Whatever is in that bed, I shall keep it clean and warm and spoken to. I nursed my father 11 months and I know what is owed. That is not nothing, and I will not have it called a bargain in my hearing. Charity, said her uncle. Go and see to the fowls. Yes, uncle, said Charity Odell, and went and shut the door quietly, which was somehow worse than slamming it. Jasper rode back to Havermere that night in the rain with his grandfather's marriage articles in the case under his arm, and did not sleep. He had inherited 11 weeks before. The old Duke had died at Havermere on the 3rd of February with nobody in the room but a nurse and a clock. And the news had gone out slowly because his heir was 3 weeks at sea coming home from Lisbon, and on the 11th of February the old man's attorney, acting under a power 6 years old and with no more knowledge than a mill wheel, had signed articles of marriage between the Duke of Havermere and Charity Odell, spinster of Odell's Cross, and paid £4,000 to her uncle and guardian. The old Duke had been in his coffin 8 days when the ink went on. Jasper could have thrown it in the fire. Every lawyer he consulted told him so twice. He was no party to it, no consent of his had been given, and Crowell might whistle for the money in Chancery for 9 years. He signed the articles himself on the 14th of April instead, in his own name, in his own hand, and sent for a license. The wedding was at 8 in the morning on the 22nd of April at the parish church of Havermere, with the doors shut and 6 people in it, because it had been given out that the Duke was too infirm to be moved and the thing must be done quietly. She came up the aisle on her uncle's arm in a grey stuff gown, looking at the floor, the way a woman looks who has decided exactly how she means to get through the next hour. At the rail she lifted her head. Jasper watched her understand 3 things in about 4 seconds, and saw every one of them cross her face, that the man at the rail was not 90, that he was the attorney's clerk out of her uncle's parlour, and that she was standing in a church with 2 witnesses and a license and no way out of it whatever. Behind her, Barnaby Crowell made a noise like a man who has sat down on his hat. Wait, who is this? The Duke of Havermere is. I am the Duke of Havermere, said Jasper. My grandfather died on the 3rd of February. You contracted with a dead man, sir. Your money is spent, and there is no other Duke of Havermere in England. Then the articles are void. This is a fraud. The articles are signed by me in my own hand 8 days ago. I have your receipt for £4,000 in my pocket, and you gave your consent in writing on the 11th of February and again on the 16th of March. Jasper did not raise his voice. You may have your niece back, sir, and welcome if she wishes it. You will not have the money. I think we both know how that will be settled. The curate coughed. Somebody's shoe scraped on the stone. And Charity Odell, 25 years old herself, standing between the man she had been sold to and the man who had sold her, said in a voice that carried perfectly well in a small church, "I am not a parcel to be handed back over the counter. Go on with it, if you please." They went on with it. She said the words, he said his. The ring was too big and she closed her hand to keep it on, and afterwards in the vestry, when she had signed her name in a plain, steady hand, she said to her husband the first private sentence of their marriage. They told me a 12-month. "You have just made it 50 years, and neither of us was asked, and you knew and I did not. That is the whole of what I have against you, and I shall not say it again, but I shall not have it argued away either, and you will oblige me by never once telling me I am fortunate. You will have the East Rooms, which have their own stair, and 400 a year settled on you whatever becomes of me. If you would rather live at the Dower House at Kell, you may, and I will not come there unless I am asked. And what am I to do all day? Whatever you please." "Nothing, if you please." "Then we shall quarrel by Friday," said the Duchess of Havermere, "because I have never once in my life been let alone with nothing, and I'm not going to begin at 25 in a house with 40 rooms in it." It was the second morning. They were in the great library at Havermere, which had a fire in it for the first time since the old Duke took to his bed, and the dust sheets were coming off the furniture around them like snow off a roof. "Then take something," said Jasper. "There is 11 years of neglect in this house and nobody in it under 60. Give me the parish books, the charity books. Every house like this has them, and no house like this ever reads them." She held out her hand. "You may say no. But if you say yes, I shall want them all, and I shall want the agent to sit down with me and not stand up looking at the window." He gave her the parish books. She was 3 days over them. On the 4th she sent for the agent and Jasper, who had meant to leave them to it, and found to his surprise that he did not want to, sat in the corner with a newspaper he did not read. "Mr. Havermere's Almshouses," said Charity, "founded 1691. 6 women, 4 shillings a week each, a load of coal at Michaelmas, charged upon the rents of the nether farm. When were the 4 shillings last paid?" There was a pause of the kind Jasper had heard in the Lisbon Customs House. "It has been in some confusion since the late Duke's illness." "It has been in confusion 6 years and 11 weeks, and the nether farm rents have come in to this estate on the day every quarter throughout, because they are here in your own hand. 6 women, 4 shillings a week, 6 years. £374 8 shillings received by this office for a purpose and not applied to it, and 2 of those women are in the ground now and cannot be paid at all. Madam, I am not accusing you of putting it in your pocket. I am saying nobody asked, and that it is a great deal easier to be honest when somebody asks." She closed the book. "The arrears go the 4 living women on Saturday, and to the parish for the 2 who are dead. The book comes to me every quarter day. I shall sign it, you will countersign it, and neither of us will be confused again. Your Grace should know," said the agent stiffly, "that this is not usual." "No," said Jasper, "it is not. Do it." Afterwards his wife stood at the window with her arms folded, and he saw that her hands were shaking slightly, which she plainly did not intend anybody to see. "That cost you something." "Everything costs me something at present. I have been in this house 4 days, and I do not know where the back stairs go." She turned round. "Do not make me grateful, Your Grace. I am married to you and I do not know you, and I would rather be useful than obliged." On the 11th of June a boy in the stable yard put a hay knife through the web of his own hand. Jasper came round the corner into a good deal of noise, the boy grey, the head groom shouting for the doctor, 4 men in the way. And into the middle of it came the Duchess of Havermere at a fast walk with her sleeves already pushed up. "Sit him on the mounting block on the block where I can see. Somebody bring clean water and the linen out of the harness room. Not that, the white." She took the hand and turned it to the light. "That is a clean cut, and it has missed the tendon, and you are going to keep that hand, and you are going to be sick in a minute, and there is no shame in it." She wound the linen twice. "Now, press here hard with your thumb and hold it, and count 5. The boy said something. "Out loud," said Charity. "Count 5 out loud. It is the counting that does it. Jasper, Duke of Havermere, stood in his own stable yard with his hand flat on the corner of the wall and found that the whole afternoon had gone strange on him. He could not have said why. It was a sentence, a woman's voice in a yard telling a frightened boy to count out loud. And it went through him from the crown of his head to his boots and left him with a feeling he could not name and could not put down, something between recognition and grief, with no picture attached to it anywhere. That evening he asked her, as lightly as he could manage, where she had learned to dress a wound. On my father, mostly, said Charity, not looking up from the parish book, and on whoever came to the door. We were the nearest house to the Havermere road for 4 miles, your grace, and people did come to the door. Why did you sign it? Because it was signed already. That is not an answer, and you have given it to me 4 times, said Charity. Your own lawyers told you to burn it. You told me so yourself in June. A man of 25 with 11,000 a year does not marry a bailiff's niece out of a parlour at Odell's Cross because a dead man's attorney made a mistake. Why did you sign it? Jasper looked at the fire rather too long. I had my reasons, and they were good ones, and I shall tell you them one day. Then you will tell them to a woman who has stopped asking, she said, took the parish book and went. That was the whole of the summer, in one exchange, twice a month. In every other particular they did very well, and the county said so, which he minded. He had the almshouses re-roofed on her word. He rode out with her twice a week and found she had a seat like a farmer and no fear whatever. And in September she said a thing to him in the stable yard that he kept. You are a great deal kinder than anybody warned me, and it does not settle the account, and I wish you would stop making me like you before I know what you are. It was the nearest either of them had come to a declaration, and it was interrupted by a gig coming up the avenue with 2 men in it. Barnaby Crowle had not improved in 5 months. He had a new coat, and behind him came a narrow man in black with a leather case, introduced as Mr. Spark of Renchester, who did the talking. There is a difficulty, your grace, which we should all prefer to settle at a table. Say it at the table then. The articles of the 11th of February were made with a gentleman 8 days in his grave. My client consented to a marriage between his ward and a nobleman of 90. What his ward received was a gentleman of 25 and a lifetime, which is a wholly different consideration, and my client's consent to that has never been asked for or given. Your client took £4,000, which is the very point, said Spark comfortably. It is now plain he was imposed upon, and his poor niece imposed upon, and the whole transaction wants looking at by a court. We shall say the marriage was procured by fraud and want of true consent, and is null. We shall say, I am sorry, madam, that the lady, being young, much under uncle's hand, and of no great understanding in business, cannot be held to have consented to anything at all. Of no great understanding, said Charity. It is a form of words, madam. It is a form of words that would put me back in my uncle's house at the end of it without a marriage, without a farthing, and without a character. Say the rest. What does he want? Crowle leaned in, and for the first time that afternoon spoke for himself. 6,000, he said, and I go home and never trouble any of you again. You have got the girl, your grace. Nobody says you have not got the girl. But a thing bought at one price is not to be kept at that price forever, and my consent was cheap in February. Jasper stood up. Afterwards he was rather proud of the 2 sentences he got out, and a good deal less proud of what he did in November. You will get nothing from me at this table, sir. And you have just said in front of 3 witnesses that your consent was a thing to be bought, which I fancy your own proctor would rather you had kept behind your teeth. Spark did not blink. Then we file, and the cause is set down, and it will be heard in the consistory court at Renchester on the 4th of December. It will be public. There will be evidence about the lady's upbringing, and her mother's family, and her understanding, and every attorney's clerk in 3 counties will be in that gallery. My client has nothing whatever to lose by it, which is a great advantage in litigation. They went down the avenue at 4 o'clock. Jasper stood in the hall with his hands behind him. The 4th of December, said Charity. He cannot win it. He does not have to win it. She was not white now. She was very steady, which he had learned was worse. He has to say it. He has to stand up in a public court and say I am a girl of no understanding who was sold by a fraud and went along with it. And after that it will not signify what the court decides, because it will be printed in the Renchester paper and copied into 2 others. And it will be the first thing anybody in England ever hears about the Duchess of Havermere for the rest of my life. She went up the stairs and stopped halfway. £6,000 would be very cheap, would it not, she said, if you did not have to look at me afterwards. You will have to dance with me. It is the harvest supper and they will talk for a year if you do not. I do not dance. Then you will learn in front of 90 people, said Charity, which is how everything else in my life has been done, and I promise you it is survivable. The harvest supper at Havermere was held in the great barn on the last Saturday in October. Trestles, a fiddle cider, the whole parish, and 4 old women in new shawls who had been paid 6 years of arrears in September and had come to look at the Duchess the way one looks at weather. He danced with her twice, badly. She laughed at him both times, and the barn saw it and approved. Walking back at midnight under a hard, clear sky, she said out of nowhere, I have stopped asking why you signed it. I know. I want you to know why I stopped. It is not that I have given it up. It is that it does not signify any more, because whatever the reason was, you have spent 6 months proving what you are, and a woman may take the evidence of her own eyes over a piece of paper. She stopped in the avenue. I shall say nothing else tonight. But you may take my arm the rest of the way, if you like. He took her arm the rest of the way, and at the door she stood 1 moment longer than she needed to, and neither of them said good night for the space of about 3 breaths. That was the 28th of October. On the 14th of November the list of witnesses came from Renchester. Barnaby Kroll, Mrs. Yvette, the woman who had kept the school at Odell's Cross when Charity was 9, 2 men from the village to speak to the mother's people. The whole of it went to one point, set out in the proctor's flat hand, to prove that the said Charity Odell was of weak understanding, ill-taught, easily led, and incapable of a true consent. Jasper read it at the muniment room window and knew, with a clarity he had never had about anything, that he would pay any sum on earth to keep his wife out of that gallery. That was the whole of his reasoning. It was creditable, and it ruined everything. He went to Renchester on the 17th without telling her, because she would have stopped him, and he was aware even then that this was precisely why he ought not to have gone. Spark received him at 4. The business took 40 minutes. £6,000 in a bill on his London bankers, a deed of release, a receipt in Kroll's own hand, and an undertaking in writing that the cause would be withdrawn before the end of term. Came home at midnight, slept better than he had for a month, and said nothing at breakfast. The discharge and the copy receipt came up in the ordinary post on the 22nd, addressed to the estate, and were opened as everything addressed to the estate had been opened since June by the Duchess of Havermere at the muniment room table. She was still sitting there when he came in at 11. £6,000, said Charity. Jasper stopped in the doorway. Charity? £6,000 on the 17th of November to Barnaby Kroll, in consideration of his withdrawing a suit in which he has sworn that his niece is a half-wit. She set the paper down very precisely, squaring it with the edge of the table. In February my uncle sold me for £4,000. In November my husband bought me for 6. I have gone up in the world. That is not what. It is exactly what. Do not tell me what a thing is while I am holding it. She stood up. I have spent 9 months in this house being told I am not a parcel. I said it myself in that church with my uncle's hand still on my arm. And the first time it was inconvenient for anybody, you went to Renchester and paid a man money for me in a room I was not in without asking, because it was quicker and because you knew what I should say. You would have said no. Yes, I would have said no. That is what consent is. That is the very thing his petition says I am not capable of, and you have proved his case for him with a bill on your London bankers. Jasper had no answer, because there was none. He stood in the door of his own muniment room and understood that he had done, in 40 minutes at a table in Renchester, precisely what Barnaby Kroll had done at a table at Odell's Cross in February, that the only difference was the price and the motive, and that she had been the article in both. The second letter came 4 days later, and was the shortest thing Spark ever wrote. His client had received the £6,000 and given his receipt for it. His client had, on further reflection, found that his conscience would not permit him to withdraw a cause touching the honour of his family. The cause therefore stood as set down at Renchester on the 4th of December, and his client would rely, among other matters, upon the said payment as evidence of the manner in which the marriage had been procured and maintained. Jasper put the letter down and put his hands over his face. Charity read it twice, folded it, and put it in the tin box with the parish books, which he thought afterwards was the most frightening thing she did that winter. "I am going to bed," she said. "Do not sit up making plans about me." On the 27th of November she drove herself to Renchester with the second groom and did 4 things, and told nobody at Havermere any of them. She saw a proctor of the court in his own chambers and retained him in her own name, out of her own settled income of 400 a year, and paid him 10 guineas on account. She entered an appearance in the cause on her own behalf, as a party in her own right, and not through her husband. She gave notice that she would be examined in person, in open court, on the 4th of December, and would answer any question whatever that was put to her upon the matter of her understanding. And she wrote out, from memory in a fair hand, over 9 pages, every entry she had ever made in Barnaby Kroll's household ledger between her 15th birthday and the day she was married. "You will sit at the back, my proctor says. Your proctor is very good, and he is not the person on trial. I am." She was tying her bonnet in the passage of the Renchester Inn at 9:30 in the morning, and her hands were perfectly steady. "If you stand up in that court and speak for me, every man in the gallery goes home and says the Duke answered for her, poor thing, as well he might. Sit at the back, Jasper. It is the only thing left that helps," was the first time she had used his name. The consistory court at Renchester sat in a panelled chamber off the cathedral cloister with a gallery on 3 sides, and by 10 there was not a place in it. Attorneys, clerks, 2 newspaper men, 40 of the county, and a row of Havermere tenants who had come 30 miles in carts and stood at the back with their hats in their hands. Spark opened for an hour and did it well. A dead man's articles, a guardian imposed upon, £4,000 paid under a mistake, 6,000 paid in November. He held the receipt up to procure the withdrawal of this very cause. And at the centre of it, said Spark, a young woman wholly under the hand of her family, of no understanding in matters of business, incapable in law of the consent which alone can make a marriage. "The court will hear the lady," said the judge. She was in the box for 2 hours and 50 minutes, and Jasper, Duke of Havermere, sat at the back of that gallery between a corn factor and one of his own hedgers, and did not say one word and did not stand up, and had to hold his hat in both hands to manage it. "You were told, madam, that your intended husband was 90 years of age. I was. You did not question it. I did not question it. I acted upon it. There is a difference, and I shall explain it, and I would be obliged if the court would let me finish, because I have been interrupted a great deal in my life." She turned slightly toward the bench. "On the 11th of February my uncle received £4,000. I know the sum because I kept his books. I had kept them since I was 15, there being nobody else in that house who could add. £341 of it was gone by the 20th, 84 for a coat, 60 for a mare, 92 to a Bristol wine merchant against an old account, the rest in cash to himself. It is all in his ledger, and I have written out every entry from memory over 9 pages, lodged with my proctor, and my uncle's own book may be sent for and compared, and I ask that it should be. There was a certain amount of noise in the gallery. You are asked about consent, madam, not bookkeeping. They are the same questions, sir. I am told I could not have understood what I was doing. I understood it exactly. I understood that a man of 90 had been bought for me, and that I was expected to nurse him and outlive him. I understood the money was spent and could not be got back. I understood that if I refused I should be at Odell's Cross the rest of my life on £4 a year and my keep, and that there was another gentleman at Bristol my uncle had spoken of twice, who is 61, and whose name I can give the court if it wishes. So I chose. I stood in that church knowing I had been sold, and when I came to the rail I found the man was not 90 at all but 25, and that I had been lied to by every person who ever fed me. And I said the words anyway, in front of 6 people, with my uncle standing there, because if I had walked out of that church I should have been handed back over a counter like a parcel, and I had determined that whatever else was done to me, that was not going to be done to me. You may call that many things, sir. Do not call it one of understanding. It is the only piece of understanding I have ever been allowed to use. The judge let the gallery run a moment before he quieted it. Spark came at her for another hour, and it did not answer. He put it to her that her aunt would swear she could not read a bill of fare. She replied that her aunt had dictated the household orders to her every Monday for 11 years, and the court might send for those as well. Then he put the £6,000, and it was the only moment in the day when Jasper thought his heart would stop. Your husband paid £6,000 in November to have this cause withdrawn. Do you defend that? No, said Charity. The room went quite still. I do not defend it, and I did not know of it. He did it in a room I was not in to spare me this morning, and it was wrong, and I told him so on the 22nd of November in language I shall not repeat in a cathedral. If the court thinks worse of him for it, I cannot stop the court. But I would ask the court to notice what my uncle did with the money, which was to take it, give a receipt, and come here anyway. Spark sat down at 1:20. He was not a bad man, he was a hired one, and he had the sense to know when a case has turned to sand. Then he made his last throw, and it opened the floor under him. There is one matter unexplained, and the court will feel it. His Grace was under no obligation whatever. He might have burned those articles, and every lawyer he consulted told him so. Yet within days of coming into his title, a gentleman of 25 ratified a contract to marry a bailiff's niece he had never seen. That is not credible unless there was some understanding between these parties beforehand, and if there was, the whole transaction is a fraud upon my client. Let his Grace be sworn, and tell this court why he signed. The judge looked to the back of the gallery. His Grace will oblige the court. Jasper came down through the standing people and was sworn, and put his hand on the rail and did not look at Spark at all. He looked at his wife. 3 years ago, last January, in the frost, I was coming back from Kell alone, and my horse went down on the black ice at the top of the Havermere road and broke his neck and my leg with him. It was 4 in the afternoon. There was no moon that night, and I do not recollect much of the next 11 days. I know I was carried into a poor house at Odell's Cross by 2 carters, because it was the nearest door with a light in it. There was an old man in that house dying by inches, and a girl of 22 keeping him and the fowls and the books, and she took me in as well, and set my leg with the wheelwright's help, and sat up with me 11 nights. I never saw her face. I had been 3 hours in the snow, and my eyes were gone for a fortnight. The room was dark for me the whole time I lay in it. I knew her voice and her hands, and that she made me count out loud whenever a thing was going to hurt. My people came for me on the 12th day, and she was out at the market when they carried me off, and I left money that she sent back, and I wrote twice from Lisbon and had no answer, and I did not know an address beyond Odell's Cross. I knew one thing only. When they asked her what she was called, she said Charity. He turned to the bench. On the 14th of April, I opened my grandfather's articles and read the name Charity Odell of Odell's Cross, and I signed them within the hour, and I have never told her, because she made it very plain on the day I married her that she would not be told she was fortunate. The court pronounces the marriage good, valid and binding, and dismisses the petition. My lord, said Spark, sit down. The court has more to say, and your client will hear it standing. The judge took off his spectacles. In 31 years I have not heard a case of this kind so ill supported. The petitioner saw his niece was of weak understanding. He has sat here 5 hours and heard her give an account of his own household accounts from memory, which his own ledger, sent for at noon, agrees with to the shilling. He took £4,000 for her in February. He took 6,000 more in November upon an undertaking to withdraw, and did not withdraw. The 9 pages, the ledger and the receipt go to the proper officer this afternoon, and Mr. Kroll will hear further about the oath he swore in this building, costs to the respondent throughout. Barnaby Kroll went out through a gallery that stood up to let him pass, which is the coldest thing a room can do to a man, and then the Duke of Havermere, who had been sworn and not discharged, said, My lord, may I say one thing more? while the court is sitting and these people are still here? You may. He turned to the gallery rather than to the bench. On the 17th of November I paid £6,000 to keep my wife out of this room. I did not tell her. I did it because I could not bear the thought of her standing where she has stood today, and because it was quick, and because I knew what she would say if I asked. It was the same act her uncle did in February, a man settling a woman's business at a table she was not sitting at, and the only difference the price and the motive, and I have had 3 weeks to learn how little those weigh. She has been married to me since April and has had no say in one single thing that has happened to her since. She did not choose the day or the man or the house or this court, so I have brought a deed and my proctor holds it, executed on my part this morning. It settles upon the Duchess of Havermere the manor and rents of Kell, 500 a year and the dower house, absolutely to her separate use, whatever becomes of me and whatever she chooses to do. And it contains an article of separation drawn in her favour, complete but for her name, which she may sign at any hour of any day for the rest of her life without asking anybody's leave, and which binds me to keep away from her and to go on paying. It is her paper. She takes it out of this court with her, and I shall never mention it again as long as I live. Whether she stays at Havermere is a thing I should like just once, to have decided by the only person in England who has never been consulted about it. The court rose at 4:20. It was dark outside and freezing, and the cloister was full of people who all found urgent reasons to be standing about. Charity Odell came down the steps with the deed under her arm and stopped in front of her husband. You counted out loud, she said. He could not speak for a moment. I am told I did. You did. Every time. And you asked me on the 9th night whether the old gentleman in the next room was my father, and I said yes, and you said you were sorry, and then you went to sleep. And it was the only time in 11 months that anybody said they were sorry about my father to me. Her eyes were streaming and her voice had not shifted a quarter tone. I never knew who you were. I thought you were a farmer's son. When they carried you off there was a horse blanket left behind, and I mended it and kept it, because it was good wool, and it is in a chest at Odell's Cross this minute with my mother's things. Charity. I am not signing that paper, she said, and I am not tearing it up either, because it is the first thing anybody ever gave me that I did not have to be grateful for. It goes in the tin box with the parish books, and it stops there, so that every day I am at Havermere is a day I have chosen, and you may think about that whenever you are tempted to go to Renchester and settle my affairs for me. That is fair. It is more than fair. It is what I want. She put her hand through his arm, in a cathedral cloister in front of 40 of the county and 2 newspaper men. Take me home. I have 4 old women expecting their coal. They were married again in the parish church at Havermere in the spring, because the law required it. The law being perfectly satisfied, but because the first time had been at 8 in the morning behind shut doors with 6 people, and the second time the church was so full that the tenants stood in the porch in the churchyard. And the 4 almshouse women sat in the front pew in their new shawls and cried the whole way through. Barnaby Crowell was dealt with by the proper officer and left the county, and the £6,000 was recovered out of his estate in the end and given to the Almshouse Foundation, which has kept 8 women instead of 6 ever since, and pays them on the day. The Duchess of Havermere has the parish books still and signs them every quarter day. She rebuilt the school at Odell's Cross out of the Kell rents, in her own name, and put a rail round her father's grave. Her husband learned to dance a good deal better, though never well. And in that parish they still tell it the way it happened, which nobody has ever improved upon, that they wed her to a man they said was 90, and there was not a soul in the church that morning, not her uncle, and not the bride, who knew that the Duke of Havermere was 25, and that the 2 of them had met 3 winters before in the dark, and neither had ever seen the other's face, and it took a broken leg, a dead man's contract and a public court to introduce them properly.